This boy watched his father get murdered right before his eyes by the very people he trusted, all because they wanted to steal the secret of the infinite fist, a legendary technique capable of unleashing the most terrifying punch in the world. After that, he vanished for 10 years, mastering the technique in secret, but when he finally returned, everything had changed. Adventurers ruled the world, his father's killers were celebrated as legendary heroes, and his precious manual had already been stolen by a random thief. Even after losing everything, one thing never changed. His infinite fist was still overwhelmingly powerful. Story begins during one of the darkest periods in Murim history, when an enormous battlefield was covered with countless fallen warriors. The brutal conflict, remembered as the Great War between the righteous sects and the demonic forces, finally came to an end after the legendary combat immortal defeated the feared celestial demon and restored peace to the martial world. Years later, that legendary battle had become nothing more than a story passed down to the next generation. Inside a small mountain dojo, an elderly martial artist shared tales of the legendary Shining Eye Fist with a group of young disciples. According to him, anyone who mastered that supreme martial art would become an invincible warrior. While the other children listened with admiration, one black-haired boy remained unconvinced. Having heard similar stories countless times, he believed his father was exaggerating once again. To him, it made little sense that someone who possessed such an incredible technique would choose to spend his life hidden away in a tiny dojo instead of ruling the martial world. Rather than feeling offended, the master simply enjoyed the peaceful life he had built. Surrounded by cheerful disciples and his beloved son, he believed true happiness was found in a quiet existence rather than endless battles. Protecting those precious people meant far more than fame or absolute strength. That peaceful moment came to a sudden end. The young boy noticed something horrifying through a small opening in the door. His father, the man who had always claimed to be invincible, stood covered in blood after falling into a carefully planned ambush. Even with multiple swords piercing his back, the master refused to collapse. Blood poured from his mouth as he struggled to remain standing, quickly realizing that his body had also been poisoned by an extremely rare and deadly herb that should have disappeared from the world long ago. Standing before him were the people he had once trusted the most. His own disciples had betrayed him. Leading the betrayal was the first senior disciple, Jinam, accompanied by the second senior disciple, Jokyeon, the third senior disciple, Yukhwan, and finally the fourth senior disciple, Wang Pai. Together, the four had abandoned their loyalty in pursuit of the ultimate martial power. Despite suffering fatal injuries, the master showed no fear. Instead, he looked at his former disciples with disappointment, fully understanding that their greed had driven them to betray the very man who had raised them. When the traitors demanded the secret behind his unrivaled strength, the master calmly revealed that the true inheritance had already been passed on to someone else. The announcement instantly shook the traitors. Realizing they were about to lose everything they had fought for, they became desperate to uncover the identity of the successor before it was too late. Hidden nearby, the master's young son silently watched every moment unfold. Knowing his own life was nearing its end, the master apologized to his son for allowing him to witness such a tragic scene. At the same time, he decided that his final battle would become the greatest lesson he could ever leave behind. Every movement of his body carried meaning. Every stance demonstrated the true essence of martial arts. With every remaining ounce of strength gathered into a single fist, the master concentrated his life's entire cultivation into one final attack. His fist moved only once, yet that single punch contained the power accumulated over decades of training. The terrified traitors immediately realized the overwhelming danger and rushed forward together, hoping to stop the technique before it was unleashed. They were already too late. The master's final strike erupted like a natural disaster, releasing a devastating shockwave that swallowed the surrounding mountains. A brilliant light illuminated the night sky, while the forest trembled beneath the overwhelming force of the attack. The explosion carved through everything in its path, leaving destruction wherever its power reached. When the blinding light finally faded, silence returned to the battlefield. The young boy slowly stepped out from hiding and approached his father's motionless body, with tears streaming down his face. Although barely clinging to life, the master still wore a peaceful smile. He admitted that perhaps true invincibility had only been an impossible dream. Even so, what truly mattered was whether his son had understood the meaning hidden within that final punch. Pointing toward the distant horizon, he entrusted the boy with the ultimate legacy of their lineage. The ancient martial manual contained the secrets of the boundless fist, a technique capable of embracing every martial art and surpassing them all. Rather than preserving its old name forever, the master wished for his son to continue its evolution, and someday give the technique a name worthy of his own path. Having passed on everything he possessed, the master's body gradually crumbled into ashes, disappearing before his son's eyes. Left completely alone, the young heir tightly embraced the precious manual, silently accepting the enormous responsibility now resting on his shoulders. Elsewhere, the surviving traitors barely managed to escape with their lives. Even after joining forces, they had suffered catastrophic injuries from only a fraction of their master's final attack. Realizing the true inheritance had survived, they immediately ordered a relentless search for both the master's son and every remaining disciple connected to him. Their goal was simple: no survivor could be allowed to live. Carrying the precious manual beneath his clothes, the young boy fled deep into the mountains without looking back. For the next 10 years, he completely vanished from the world. Hidden inside the wilderness, he devoted every waking moment to perfecting a single punch, repeating the same movement endlessly until it became a part of his very existence. Revenge became the only purpose that kept him alive. By the age of 20, Jin Guan had transformed himself into an extraordinary martial artist. Through years of relentless training, he created a unique fighting style built around his own understanding of the boundless fist. With bandages wrapped tightly around his fists and unwavering determination in his eyes, Jin Guan finally decided it was time to leave the mountains and fulfill the promise he had made to his late father. After spending an entire decade in complete isolation, Jin Guan finally stepped back into civilization, expecting to find the same murim world he had left behind as a child. Instead, the first thing he encountered left him completely bewildered. People dressed in strange outfits, unlike anything he had ever seen. Some wore medieval-style armor, while others looked more like magicians than martial artists. Even more confusing, their conversations revolved around guilds, hunter rankings, and power levels, terms that meant absolutely nothing to him. Unable to make sense of the bizarre scene, Jin Guan quietly watched them pass. He wondered if the world had truly changed so much during the 10 years he had spent training alone. Even the modern clothing worn by young women seemed incredibly unfamiliar to him, making him briefly question whether this had become the latest fashion. Pushing those thoughts aside, he continued toward the martial arts village where he had grown up. However, the familiar village was nowhere to be found. In its place stood an enormous modern city, filled with towering buildings and luxurious architecture stretching as far as the eye could see. The transformation was so unbelievable that Jin Guan could hardly believe only 10 years had passed. Hoping to understand what had happened, he stopped an elderly passerby and asked about the disappearance of the old village. The old man quickly realized that Jin Guan must have been living in complete isolation, as anyone else would already know about the catastrophic event that had reshaped the entire world. He began explaining the events that unfolded exactly 10 years earlier. Everything started when a massive rift suddenly appeared high in the sky. From that mysterious opening, an unknown energy poured into the world, spreading across the land at an alarming rate. Every plant and animal touched by that energy underwent horrifying mutations, transforming into violent monsters capable of attacking humans. As if that disaster weren't enough, powerful beings from another dimension soon emerged through the portal. These newcomers, later known as hunters, immediately launched ruthless attacks on humanity. Their overwhelming abilities made traditional martial artists nearly powerless against them. Even low-ranking hunters possessed strength that far exceeded most murim masters, causing the martial world to collapse within a short period of time. Countless legendary warriors lost their lives trying to defend humanity. Just as the world seemed destined for destruction, 4 extraordinary figures stepped forward and led humanity's counterattack. Those warriors became known across the world as the 4 Celestial Kings. Working together, they united the remaining forces and successfully drove back the invaders from the other dimension. Their leadership inspired ordinary people to awaken mysterious supernatural abilities of their own, giving birth to a completely new generation of hunters. Eventually, peace was restored, and society rebuilt itself around these newly awakened powers. Traditional martial arts gradually faded into history, as hunters became the protectors of the modern world. Guilds replaced martial sects, magical abilities became the new standard of strength, and the 4 Celestial Kings were celebrated as the greatest heroes humanity had ever known. For everyone else, it was an inspiring story. For Jin Guan, it was a nightmare. The names of those celebrated heroes were painfully familiar. They were the very same disciples who had betrayed his father, stolen his legacy, and tried to erase his entire bloodline. The people responsible for murdering the combat immortal had somehow rewritten history and were now worshipped as humanity's greatest saviors. Unable to process the truth, Jin Guan stood frozen while the old man casually walked away, encouraging him to learn more about the modern world. Left alone, Jin Guan silently clenched his fists. The weight of 10 years of training suddenly felt even heavier than before. His father's killers had not only escaped punishment, but had risen to the highest positions in the world. While struggling to accept this cruel reality, Jin Guan accidentally brushed shoulders with a cheerful blue-haired girl rushing past him. She quickly continued on her way without drawing any attention, while Jin Guan paid little mind to the brief encounter. Thinking it would be best to gather more information before taking any action, he reached inside his robes to check the small amount of money he had brought with him. His expression immediately changed. Everything was gone. The coins had disappeared. More importantly, the precious martial arts manual left behind by his father had also vanished. A terrible realization struck him almost instantly. The only person who had come close enough to steal it was the blue-haired girl from moments earlier. Meanwhile, the thief hurried into a dark alley, convinced that anything hidden so carefully had to be valuable. Curious about her prize, she finally pulled out the old manual, completely unaware that she had just stolen the greatest martial arts inheritance in history. Before she could inspect it further, a calm but intimidating presence suddenly appeared behind her. Perched silently above the alley, Jin Guan watched her with unwavering eyes. Without raising his voice, he made it clear that the manual she held was far more valuable than anything she could possibly imagine. Alice immediately froze in shock. She had never sensed anyone following her. When she demanded to know how he had tracked her down so easily, Jin Guan revealed that locating her had been effortless because he simply followed the energy she left behind. Alice's confidence vanished. Unable to measure his strength, she instinctively assumed she had encountered an incredibly powerful hunter. Jin Guan showed no interest in explaining himself. His only concern was recovering the priceless legacy his father had entrusted to him. Realizing she was standing before someone far stronger than expected, Alice immediately abandoned any thought of resisting. She returned the stolen manual without hesitation and tried to calm the situation before it escalated. However, instead of simply walking away, she quickly came up with another plan. After noticing that Jin Guan carried only a few old iron coins, she understood that he had no knowledge of the modern world's currency. Seeing an opportunity, she began weaving a heartbreaking story in hopes of taking advantage of his kindness. According to her tale, her younger sister was suffering from a life-threatening illness and desperately needed expensive medicine. A mysterious healer was supposedly the only person capable of saving her, but the treatment cost far more money than she could ever afford. She painted an even darker picture by claiming that girls who couldn't pay were forced to surrender themselves as payment, making the situation appear hopeless. Every detail of the story was carefully crafted to earn Jin Guan's sympathy. Listening quietly, Jin Guan showed genuine concern rather than suspicion. Helping innocent people had always been part of the values his father taught him, and if someone truly needed saving, he saw no reason to ignore it. Without questioning her story, he decided to accompany Alice and personally meet the so-called healer. The decision immediately backfired. Alice had never expected him to insist on going with her. What began as a simple scam suddenly became much more complicated, leaving her desperately searching for a way to continue the lie. Eventually, she guided him toward a large mansion hidden away from the public. The moment they approached the building, Jin Guan sensed something unusual. Instead of the scent of herbs or medicine, the entire place was filled with an unsettling and sinister aura. Years of harsh training had sharpened his instincts, allowing him to immediately recognize that this wasn't a place where lives were saved. It was a place overflowing with danger. As the entrance opened, several armed men appeared inside. Their expressions carried clear hostility, and none of them resembled doctors or healers in the slightest. Realizing the truth, Jin Guan calmly prepared to leave without creating trouble. Before he could take another step, Alice suddenly revealed her true intentions. With a powerful kick from behind, she shoved him directly into the mansion before he had a chance to react. The cheerful, helpless girl disappeared completely, replaced by a cunning thief who admitted that the entire story had been nothing more than a carefully planned trap. The mansion served as the headquarters of a notorious black market organization that specialized in illegal human trafficking. To the criminals gathered inside, Jin Guan wasn't a person. He was merchandise. Alice expected a generous reward for delivering such a healthy young man, while the traffickers happily examined their newest captive. His impressive physique alone convinced them he would fetch an excellent price at auction. The criminals mocked his outdated clothing and rough appearance, believing he was nothing more than a homeless wanderer, with no family, who would ever come looking for him. Surrounded from every direction, Jin Guan remained completely calm. Instead of fear, a faint smile slowly appeared across his face. His reaction confused every criminal in the room. None of them could understand why someone facing slavery looked completely unconcerned. For Jin Guan, however, the situation had become surprisingly simple. Despite living in a world that had changed beyond recognition, one thing remained exactly the same. There would always be people who preyed upon the weak for their own selfish gain. Seeing criminals like these only reminded him of the traitors who had murdered his father years ago. One of the larger gang members stepped forward, gripping a massive wooden weapon, while preparing to crush the strange young man standing before them. Jin Guan quietly lowered his gaze. His right hand slowly formed a fist. 10 years of relentless training had been dedicated to perfecting a single attack. Until this moment, he had never truly tested that power against another human being. Since the people standing before him had abandoned their humanity long ago, he felt no hesitation. There was no guilt. There was no mercy, only a single punch. Gathering every ounce of mental focus and physical strength into his right fist, Jin Guan prepared to unleash the technique his father had entrusted to him. The overwhelming pressure filling the room began to rise, as his first real battle in the modern world was about to begin. The young man prepared to launch his attack, focusing all his mental and physical strength into his devastating right fist. He repeated to himself that he would show no mercy to those criminals. He began the motion of his overwhelming punch. The masked giant sensed an absurd pressure coming from the attack, and murmured in astonishment, unable to react. Outside the imposing traditional Chinese mansion, everything remained calm and silent for only a fraction of a second. Suddenly, the entire structure exploded violently from the inside out, sending debris flying in every direction. Ulysses was thrown far away by the violent shockwave created by the punch and looked back in total panic. Massive chunks of concrete and roof tiles crashed down from the completely destroyed ceiling, raising a thick curtain of smoke. The surviving guild members looked around in fear as they realized what had caused such destruction. They slowly approached and found the masked giant lying motionless on the dirt floor beneath the collapsed ceiling. One of the henchmen suddenly had a stroke of inspiration and confidently pointed ahead, claiming that he had finally understood everything. He declared that the immense destruction was actually a demonstration of the boss's secret ability. He praised the incredible speed of the attack, and the confused boss gradually began believing that he had truly unleashed the punch without realizing it. The giant laughed proudly and boasted that he should never use his full strength because it would demolish the entire place. As everyone celebrated, Jin Guan remained lying on the ground, sighing as he reflected on how complicated the situation had become. He quietly observed everything from the corner of his eye, while calmly planning his next discreet move. In reality, the young man remembered that during the final instant of his punch, he had noticed something completely unexpected. Behind the mansion's wall, 2 innocent children had been happily playing soccer in the street. He immediately realized that if he completed the punch at full power, the devastating energy explosion would strike the children. Had the attack continued forward, the entire urban area would have been instantly pulverized, causing an unimaginable tragedy. Since the punch had already been launched, it was impossible to cancel it or suppress its enormous force. The only remaining option was to redirect the energy. Using complete control over his body, he redirected his fist upward instead. At the last possible moment, he changed the trajectory of the blow and released the overwhelming energy toward the sky. As a result, only the mansion's ceiling was destroyed, while the innocent children playing outside were saved. Lying beneath the rubble, the warrior found the entire situation amusing and smiled as he reflected on his power. He quietly reminded himself that strength alone was not everything. Meanwhile, the criminals believed he had gone insane and planned to sell him as a slave. None of them realized that the ragged young beggar was actually the strongest man in the world and had achieved all of this with nothing more than a simple straight punch. Later that night, the crescent moon shone through the cold iron bars of a dark prison inside the guild. Locked inside his cell, the warrior quietly watched the other prisoners sleeping on the cold stone floor. He reflected with concern that he needed to learn how to control his immense strength so innocent people would never be harmed again. He then turned toward the girl and politely introduced himself, revealing his true name. At that moment, he heard a soft sound near the prison bars and shifted his attentive gaze toward the entrance. Alice appeared on the other side of the cell. The young man remarked that her name was rather unusual. He accepted the rice ball she had brought and began eating it, though he jokingly complained that he deserved at least some boiled meat. Alice sighed in frustration, wondering how he could complain about food at a time like this. She angrily questioned whether he felt no resentment after being so cruelly deceived by her. The young man calmly asked whether her situation had been resolved. Alice hesitated, clearly burdened with guilt. Holding on to the prison bars, she confessed that she truly needed the money because her younger sister was seriously ill. Even so, she coldly insisted that she would not feel guilty for the cruel fate awaiting him. She justified her actions by explaining that, in such a cruel world, the only fool was the one who allowed themselves to be deceived. Despite her words, her trembling body revealed how much she was suffering inside. Jin Gong calmly observed that he had believed everything had changed, yet some things remained exactly the same. He gently explained that if his sacrifice could help heal her sister, then it was enough for him. Smiling kindly, he assured her that she did not need to apologize, because he had been the one who offered to help first. Alice froze in place, her cheeks turning bright red after hearing such extraordinary kindness. Jin Guan quietly remarked that nothing in the world was more painful than failing to protect one's own family. Embarrassed, Alice shouted at him and called him a stupid beggar, while he complained about her completely unprovoked rudeness. Taking the opportunity, the young man asked Alice for a favor. He requested that she keep his precious book safe until he returned to retrieve it. She awkwardly agreed, grumbling that the book smelled terrible and that she had no intention of keeping it for long. She urged him to return quickly. Meanwhile, a carriage filled with prisoners traveled through a dense forest. The guards nervously commented that the forest felt frightening even during broad daylight. One of them explained that the isolated location kept them hidden from the Hunters Association because of their slave trafficking operations. Even so, another guard remained worried because the forest was home to extremely powerful Class B monsters. Eventually, the carriage stopped in front of a large, hidden wooden warehouse. The guards announced that they had reached their destination. The henchmen rudely flung open the doors, banged their spears against the carriage, and ordered every prisoner to get out immediately. One of the guards reported to the boss that they had delivered a new group of slaves, and pointed out an especially strong prisoner sent by the guild. The disgusting slave trader casually held a glass of wine, while eagerly anticipating the arrival of the muscular newcomer. The guards shouted threateningly that any slave who dared to slack off during the walk would have their limbs broken. They also ordered that the prisoners be fed well enough to prevent them from collapsing during the auction. The prisoners were given a generous amount of food, and Jinwan devoured chicken legs with wide-eyed excitement. Afterward, the warrior was seated while the staff carefully washed his hair. Buckets of water were poured over him, as they explained that every piece of merchandise had to smell pleasant before being sold. Relaxing inside a hot bubble bath, the young man happily celebrated, finally washing away 10 years of accumulated dirt. He even concluded that the life of a slave was not so bad, leaving the employee holding his towel completely surprised by his cheerful attitude. As he looked at the bath attendant, the warrior was startled to discover that it was the same elderly man he had met before. Jinwan wondered how the old man could possibly have so many different jobs. Smiling warmly, the elderly man explained that this was simply another one of his many roles. He introduced himself as Sip Japsu and revealed that he worked in 10 different occupations. The young man then revealed his own true name. The elderly man sympathized with the young man's unfortunate situation, but the innocent warrior simply thought the place was wonderful because it offered hot baths and plenty of food. Their pleasant conversation ended abruptly when a prison guard entered with heavy footsteps. The guard demanded to know why the prisoner had not yet been branded with the iron mark used to identify slaves. Seeing the young man calmly putting his clothes back on, the jailer demanded an explanation in an extremely authoritarian tone. With a friendly and gentle smile, the warrior calmly declared that he would refuse the branding. He effortlessly removed his chains and explained that his body was a precious gift from his parents and had to be protected from scars. The jailer lunged forward to seize him by force, but the young man effortlessly dodged, leaving the guard stunned. He casually began walking away, politely thanking everyone for their hard work, while dragging along the guard who desperately tried to hold him back. The head guard was furious after witnessing the bizarre sight and immediately ordered everyone to capture the young man. Unbothered, the warrior calmly wandered through the luxurious hallways of the enormous mansion while searching for an exit. He admired the unbelievable size of the magnificent residence and quietly planned his escape. After encountering the employees who had bathed him earlier, he politely asked whether they knew the correct way out. Terrified, the employees agreed to help and nervously asked whether what he was carrying was not heavy. The young man innocently asked what they meant by heavy, completely ignoring the fact that he was dragging an entire line of guards behind him like a human chain. With absurd ease, he walked through the mansion's main gates while pulling every guard along behind him. Suddenly, the slave trader appeared outside and shouted that escaping was completely impossible. He proudly revealed that he had anticipated such an escape attempt and confidently stood surrounded by dozens of armed henchmen. The slave trader then boasted that he had hired Mong Chong, a renowned Class C hunter, to deal with any unexpected problems. The hunter immediately began delivering a long and arrogant speech, proudly boasting about his remarkable achievements and noble background. Before he could finish, his speech ended in tragedy, as a gigantic paw suddenly crushed him. An enormous mutant Class B mountain bear emerged from the shadows, leaving the slave trader horrified. The henchman fell into complete panic after witnessing the elite hunter defeated by a single strike from the monster. As the terrified criminals fled in every direction, Jinyuan simply observed the enormous bear with curiosity, finding the strange creature rather fascinating. Even with the furious beast preparing to attack him, the young man's only concern was whether the young thief was taking proper care of his precious book. The story then shifted to the brightly illuminated modern city, where colorful lights shone across countless busy buildings. Alice walked sadly through the streets, weighed down by overwhelming remorse for betraying the young man who had tried to help her. She eventually stopped in front of the alley leading to her humble home, lost in melancholy as she reflected on the choices she had made. In silence, the young girl regretted failing to keep her promise to bring medicine home for her beloved sick sister. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice calling from above and looked up in alarm. Jin Guan was crouching high above the alley, casually asking about his book. Alice was left speechless after realizing that he had somehow escaped. The young man innocently explained that the guards had simply let him go, deliberately hiding the truth about his encounter with the mutant bear. He then asked about her sister's condition, but his question was interrupted by violent coughing from inside the nearby house. Concerned, Alice rushed inside while calling out to her sister, and the young warrior carefully followed behind. The sick sister coughed repeatedly and gently asked Alice to return earlier next time, while the young man desperately begged her not to strain herself. After hesitating briefly, Jingguan finally asked for his father's book, explaining that it was extremely precious to him. The sick sister noticed the young man's presence and weakly commented that they had received a visitor that night. She introduced herself as Yong So Hai and politely apologized for being unable to greet him while standing because of her fragile condition. Looking closely at the sick woman, the warrior narrowed his eyes. He sensed that something about her was deeply unnatural. A mysterious purple aura surrounded her body, and he immediately recognized it as a bizarre, unpleasant energy, unlike anything he had ever encountered. Alice suddenly burst into tears and apologized sincerely to the young man. With overwhelming sadness, she revealed that the bandits had taken everything she had. She painfully explained that the henchman had stolen both the money meant for her sister's medicine and his precious book. The painful truth behind Alice's condition finally came to light through a heartbreaking memory from the past. After falling into the hands of the same ruthless guild, she had been stripped of everything she owned. Weak and exhausted, she collapsed onto the cold ground, while the men who had tricked her watched without the slightest bit of sympathy. Instead of showing mercy, the guild's leader shamelessly inflated the cost of the medicine she had purchased earlier, adding impossible fees and false interest, until every last coin she possessed belonged to them. Once they had taken everything, they tossed only a few worthless coins back at her, pretending the debt had been settled fairly. Alice could do nothing except stare at the tiny pile in disbelief, as the realization sank in that she had been completely deceived. The humiliation cut even deeper than the financial loss. She had trusted the wrong people, and now she had no way to fight back. Still refusing to give up completely, she quietly tried to recover the belongings that had been thrown into a corner of the courtyard. However, even that small request was denied. The masked members of the guild claimed that nothing there belonged to her anymore because the rightful owner had already been captured. The room quickly filled with mocking laughter as they treated her suffering like entertainment. calling her foolish for believing she had any rights inside their territory. The cruelty only became worse. One of the larger men suddenly kicked Alice with enough force to send her crashing across the ground. She could only curl up in pain while the guild members laughed at her helpless state. At that moment, she learned a harsh lesson about the world around her. In a place ruled by greed and violence, those who were deceived were treated as nothing more than fools. Before allowing her to leave, the guild threatened her one final time. If she remained any longer, she would end up being sold as a slave just like countless others. Some of them even joked that selling herself would be the easiest way to earn money. Their disgusting laughter echoed in her mind long after she escaped. The memory faded, but its pain remained. Fighting back tears, Alice sincerely apologized for failing to recover Jin Guan's belongings. Her voice trembled under the weight of guilt, while the humiliation she had endured was written across her face. Beside her, her sick older sister tried to comfort her, despite barely having the strength to move. Instead of blaming Alice, she worried only about the burden her younger sister had carried alone. Jin Guan silently observed everything from the side. The sorrow shared between the two sisters left a deep impression on him. Rather than reacting with anger immediately, he gently rested a hand on Alice's shoulder, silently assuring her that he understood the situation. In his eyes, the true criminals were never the victims who had been tricked. The ones who deserved punishment were those who had chosen to exploit innocent people for their own gain. After carefully lifting the sick sister into his arms and helping her settle comfortably, Jin Guan accepted part of the responsibility himself. Since Alice had been trying to help him from the beginning, he believed he also shared the blame for everything that had happened. Recovering the stolen manual was important, but saving the sick girl's life came first. He decided that both goals would be accomplished together. Before leaving, he encouraged the older sister not to lose hope. Even though her illness had already pushed her to the edge, Jin Guan believed she still had a chance to survive. His determination reassured both sisters, giving them a small ray of hope after everything they had suffered. Without wasting another moment, preparations for the journey began. Their objective was now perfectly clear. They would recover both the stolen money and the secret martial arts manual, while also securing the medicine needed to save her sister's life. Instead of marching directly through the guild's front entrance, Alice revealed a hidden route leading into the organization's true headquarters. During the day, the guild disguised itself as a perfectly respectable business, hiding its criminal activities from ordinary people. Once night fell, however, the entire place transformed into one of the largest illegal gambling dens in the region, attracting gamblers, criminals, and powerful fighters from every corner. To avoid drawing attention, Alice handed Jin Guan a dark cloak so they could blend into the crowd. Concealing their identities, the pair quietly entered the underground establishment. The atmosphere inside was completely different from the peaceful exterior. Excited spectators packed every corner, while countless bets changed hands within seconds. The entire hall overflowed with greed, excitement, and chaos. Alice quickly explained that the most popular attraction inside the arena was a bizarre competition where enormous fighters stood across from one another and settled everything with powerful slaps instead of swords or fists. Huge crowds surrounded the stage, screaming wildly as they gambled everything on each match. Jin Guan could hardly believe such a ridiculous contest actually existed. Yet after looking around, it became obvious that every person inside took the competition extremely seriously. Massive amounts of money were exchanged with every victory, making the event far more profitable than ordinary gambling. Before Alice could explain anything further, someone unexpectedly approached them from behind. An elderly man casually greeted them while carrying a drink in one hand. His strange appearance immediately caught Jin Guan's attention because he wore an outfit so ridiculous that, at that exact moment, the audience erupted with excitement. The announcer declared that the reigning champion had once again crushed another challenger with overwhelming strength. The enormous warrior standing proudly inside the arena was none other than Nahan Day, the very leader of the guild, responsible for deceiving Alice and stealing Jin Guan's belongings. The moment Jin Guan recognized him, his expression became completely serious. The secret manual he had been searching for was almost certainly in that man's possession. However, entering the tournament required betting a large amount of money first. It completely destroyed the serious atmosphere around him. Even Alice looked utterly disgusted by the unusual fashion choice. Rather than focusing on his appearance, the old man began explaining how the tournament actually worked. Two contestants would stand face to face. One fighter received the first slap while the other attacked. If the defender remained standing, the roles reversed, and the second fighter was allowed to strike back. However, if either contestant collapsed from the impact, the match ended instantly with a clear winner. Although the rules sounded simple, Alice warned Jin Guan that the contest was far more dangerous than it appeared. Ordinary people could easily lose their lives after taking even a single hit from experienced fighters. That warning alone revealed how terrifying the tournament truly was. Realizing he had nothing, Jin Guan quietly looked toward the elderly man beside him. The old man immediately became nervous, pretending not to understand what was happening. Unfortunately for him, Jin Guan refused to let the opportunity slip away. With calm persistence and a smile that felt strangely intimidating, he reminded the old man that fate had already connected their paths. Completely overwhelmed by the pressure, the old man finally surrendered. Trembling from head to toe, he handed over an entire pouch filled with coins, desperately insisting that it should simply be considered sponsorship rather than a loan. Now fully prepared, Jin Guan stepped confidently toward the betting table. He tossed the heavy bag of coins onto the counter and officially entered the tournament. The crowd instantly shifted its attention toward the unexpected challenger as whispers spread throughout the arena. Standing across from the guild's undefeated champion, Jin Guan calmly focused on the battle ahead, while quietly searching for the safest way to use his overwhelming strength without destroying everything around him. As the crowd waited in anticipation, the guild's champion immediately recognized Jin Guan as the young slave who had escaped from their grasp. Instead of showing concern, he looked down on the newcomer, convinced that someone so ordinary had no chance against him. Jin Guan, however, remained completely calm. His only objective was to recover his stolen manual, and defeating the guild leader was simply the first step toward that goal. The officials prepared the match and allowed the champion to choose who would strike first. Overflowing with arrogance, the giant confidently offered his own face, believing there was no attack powerful enough to move him. The audience burst into laughter, certain the skinny challenger would only embarrass himself before ending up back in chains. Jin Guan ignored every insult around him. His attention was focused on a far greater problem. His martial arts had reached a level where even a simple punch carried enough force to destroy everything nearby. If he attacked carelessly, innocent people inside the arena could be caught in the aftermath. Before making his move, he carefully analyzed how to control his overwhelming strength. While standing perfectly still, Jin Guan reflected on the principles of martial arts taught throughout his life. A perfectly formed fist concentrated destructive power into a single point. If closing his fist multiplied its force, then perhaps doing the exact opposite would allow him to release that same energy in a controlled manner. That single realization gave birth to an entirely new technique. Instead of throwing a punch, Jin Guan stepped forward and swung his open palm with incredible precision. The movement looked unbelievably simple, causing many spectators to believe it was nothing more than a weak slap. For a brief moment, complete silence filled the arena. Then everything changed. The enormous champion was launched straight into the ground with terrifying force, smashing headfirst into the floor and creating a massive crater beneath his body. The arena shook violently as dust exploded into the air. Every person watching froze in absolute disbelief. No one could understand how such a casual movement had produced such overwhelming power. Alice stared at the scene in complete shock. Even she struggled to believe that what she had witnessed could still be considered a slap. Jin Guan calmly explained that the attack was something entirely different. By spreading his strength across an open palm instead of concentrating it into a fist, he had successfully dispersed his overwhelming power while still delivering a devastating blow. Satisfied with the result, he silently named the technique the energy dispersion fist. Not everyone appreciated his explanation. Many spectators argued that he had simply slapped the champion and was giving an ordinary attack a fancy name. Jin Guan paid no attention to their complaints. Instead, he calmly reminded the stunned announcer that the prize money now belonged to him. The guild members exploded with rage after witnessing their leader's humiliating defeat. Furious guards immediately surrounded the arena, drawing their weapons while shouting for Jin Guan's execution. None of them intended to honor the rules of the tournament anymore. Jin Guan showed no fear. His concern remained exactly the same as before. He simply wanted his belongings returned. As the guards rushed toward him from every direction, he realized this unexpected attack offered the perfect opportunity to continue testing his newly developed technique. The hall echoed with thunderous impacts as Jin Guan unleashed one precise open palm strike after another. Every slap carried incredible force while remaining carefully controlled. One guard's face twisted under the overwhelming impact before he was launched across the room. Others crashed into walls, tables, and pillars as bodies flew through the gambling hall, like leaves caught in a violent storm. With every successful attack, Jin Guan gained a better understanding of how to regulate his immense power. The new technique allowed him to defeat powerful opponents without causing the widespread destruction his fists normally created. It was exactly the solution he had been searching for. Meanwhile, Alice and the old man hurried through the chaos, collecting the stolen belongings, the prize money, and the precious martial arts manual. Once everything had been recovered, they quickly informed Jin Guan that the mission had been completed. Without wasting another second, the trio escaped from the collapsing gambling hall before the remaining guild members could regroup. Alice could hardly believe everything she had witnessed. The stories about Jin Guan defeating slave traders by himself had sounded impossible at first, but after seeing his strength with her own eyes, she realized every word had been true. Although recovering the stolen items had been important, Jin Guan reminded everyone that an even greater priority still remained. The medicine needed to save Alice's sister could not wait any longer. Guided by Alice, they hurried through the quiet streets until an enormous medical clinic appeared before them. Bright lights illuminated the large building despite the late hour, making it stand out from the darkness surrounding the city. Standing outside the entrance, Alice sincerely thanked Jin Guan for everything he had done. Without his help, she would never have recovered the money or obtained the medicine her sister desperately needed. Jin Guan accepted her gratitude with a gentle smile before encouraging everyone to head inside immediately. The heavy wooden doors slowly opened, and the group stepped into the enormous clinic. Almost instantly, Jin Guan stopped in his tracks. A powerful and strangely familiar odor filled the air. The unusual smell triggered an old memory buried deep within his childhood. Years earlier, his father had often forced himself to soak in foul-smelling medicinal baths while pursuing stronger resistance against deadly poisons. The unbearable stench had filled their home so completely that even breathing nearby had become difficult. His father had stubbornly insisted that enduring such conditions was part of becoming a true martial artist, even though he regularly struggled against the overwhelming smell himself. Young Jin Guan could never understand why anyone would willingly remain inside such a disgusting bath. Despite all the hardship, his father admitted that his greatest regret was never successfully developing immunity to poison because his unusually sensitive sense of smell prevented him from completing the necessary training. The memory disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Back in the present, Jin Guan realized the clinic carried that exact same scent. There was no chance it was a coincidence. Someone inside was using poison techniques. His expression immediately became serious as he carefully observed every corner of the building. Moments later, a mysterious figure dressed in dark robes quietly emerged from the shadows. The man welcomed the late-night visitors with calm confidence while introducing himself as the clinic's doctor. However, before the conversation could continue, Jin Guan had already recognized the unmistakable signs surrounding him. The strange odor lingering throughout the clinic confirmed his suspicion. The man standing before them was far more dangerous than an ordinary physician. He was someone who had mastered the terrifying art of poison. After escorting Alice to the medical clinic, Jin Guan found the building surprisingly active despite the late hour. The physician explained that illness had spread rapidly throughout the village, forcing him to continue treating patients long after sunset. More and more people were arriving every day, all suffering from the same mysterious plague. The news immediately worried Alice, who feared her sister's condition might become even more serious if they had arrived any later. Even while tending to another patient, the doctor remained calm and confident. He proudly claimed that the disease was no longer a major threat because he had already developed a reliable cure. According to him, the medicine was created by refining rare ingredients, such as snow ginseng and jade bee honey, into a powerful purple pill. He considered the ability to create such elixirs a blessing, believing his medical techniques had reached an extraordinary level. Once the treatment was prepared, the doctor handed Alice a carefully wrapped packet filled with medicinal herbs and the precious pills. Relief instantly appeared on her face as she accepted the medicine with both hands. After everything she had endured, she finally believed there was hope for her sister. She expressed heartfelt gratitude, while the doctor reminded her to use the medicine correctly and continue taking good care of herself. While Alice focused entirely on the medicine, Jin Guan quietly began observing the clinic. His eyes wandered across the shelves, drawers, and cabinets, studying every herb and ingredient stored inside. The doctor continued explaining the treatment, but the sounds of drawers opening soon drew everyone's attention. Alice became irritated after noticing Jin Guan searching through the room, while the doctor politely wondered whether the young warrior was looking for something in particular. Jin Guan casually brushed off their concerns, pretending he was simply curious about the unusual herbs displayed throughout the clinic. The explanation seemed harmless enough, allowing the doctor to overlook the strange behavior. Before they left, however, the physician issued one final warning. Because demand for the medicine had increased dramatically, producing enough pills had become increasingly difficult. As supplies continued to shrink, the price of treatment would soon rise far beyond its current cost. The warning weighed heavily on Alice's mind. She stared down at the medicine in her hands, realizing she had already spent every coin meant to support both sisters for the rest of the month. Saving her sister had come first, but now she had no idea how they would survive the coming weeks. Jin Guan listened quietly without interrupting, allowing her to express every concern. After leaving the clinic, he suddenly asked to examine the medicine. Taking the packet from Alice's hands, he carefully opened it and removed one of the purple pills. Without any hesitation, he placed it into his mouth and slowly began chewing while concentrating on its taste and texture. Alice was completely stunned. Considering how valuable the medicine had been, watching one of the pills disappear so casually almost made her panic. Jin Guan simply smiled and acted as though he had eaten it because he needed a little more energy. His carefree attitude only made Alice more frustrated as she watched a portion of the expensive medicine seemingly go to waste. The elderly companion silently observed the entire exchange. Unlike Alice, he sensed that Jin Guan's actions were anything but random. Although he kept his thoughts to himself, suspicion quietly grew as he carefully studied the young warrior. By the time they returned home, the night had become peaceful once again. Alice immediately gave one of the purple pills to her older sister so the treatment could finally begin. Within moments, the woman's exhausted body showed visible improvement. Strength gradually returned to her face, and the painful weakness that had tormented her for so long began fading away. Alice tightly held her sister's hands, while tears of relief streamed down her cheeks. For the first time in what felt like forever, genuine hope filled the small home. Both sisters sincerely thanked Jin Guan for everything he had done. Without his help, they would never have recovered the stolen money or obtained the medicine needed to save a precious life. Watching the older sister recover made every dangerous step of their journey worthwhile. Even the elderly man smiled with quiet satisfaction, believing their efforts had finally paid off. As morning arrived, Jin Guan's attention quickly shifted back to food. Enjoying freshly prepared rice balls under the clear blue sky, he jokingly decided they would taste much better with meat inside. Carrying his breakfast, he climbed onto the roof of a nearby temple and peacefully admired the city stretching toward the horizon. A short while later, the elderly man effortlessly leaped onto the rooftop beside him. His surprisingly light movements immediately caught Jin Guan's attention. Such agility clearly belonged to someone skilled in martial arts. Yet the old man laughed and insisted he was nothing more than an ordinary worker trying to survive by taking on countless different jobs. The relaxed conversation soon became more serious. The elderly man admitted he had witnessed something unusual while they were leaving the clinic. During the brief moment when Alice had been distracted, Jin Guan had secretly switched the doctor's medicine packet with another one. The exchange had been so quick that even the doctor never noticed it happen. Curious about the reason, the old man wondered whether Jin Guan had secretly taken another packet from the clinic. Jin Guan calmly revealed the truth. The purple pill he had tasted was not the miracle cure the doctor claimed it to be. Although certain poisons could become medicine through careful refinement, this particular pill had been designed for a completely different purpose. Instead of healing patients, it slowly created addiction, forcing anyone who consumed it to depend entirely on the doctor for future doses. The discovery explained everything. Unable to let Alice unknowingly poison her own sister, Jin Guan had quietly replaced the dangerous medicine with genuine healing herbs before leaving the clinic. Thanks to that simple exchange, the older sister had received real treatment instead of becoming another victim. Had Alice ever learned she was feeding poison to the person she loved most, the emotional damage would have been devastating. The elderly man looked at Jin Guan with newfound admiration. What had appeared to be careless behavior was actually a carefully planned rescue. His curiosity about the mysterious young warrior only continued to grow. As another night settled over the city, attention shifted back to the doctor's temple. Hidden away from the public eye, the physician welcomed two mysterious men, dressed in dark robes and wooden masks. Bags filled with money and valuable jewelry were placed before them as payment. Proud of his recent earnings, the doctor hoped his increased contribution would finally secure him a place within their secret organization. The masked figures carefully inspected the tribute, but showed no sign of satisfaction. After checking the weight of the valuables, they claimed the payment was still insufficient. They explained that the supply of mana stones had become increasingly limited, forcing them to demand twice the usual tribute from anyone wishing to remain under their protection. Although visibly shaken, the doctor had no choice but to accept the new conditions. The masked men demanded complete loyalty, warning that only absolute obedience would earn him a recommendation to their superiors. Before leaving, they also revealed that someone had recently attacked the slave market. They ordered the doctor to remain completely silent about everything connected to the organization, making it clear that any leak of information would bring severe punishment. Fear quickly replaced the doctor's confidence. He respectfully bowed as the two mysterious figures departed into the darkness, leaving the heavy temple doors to close behind them. The secret meeting had ended, but the doctor's growing frustration had only just begun. The moment the masked visitors disappeared into the darkness, the doctor's respectful attitude vanished as well. He slammed the heavy money bag onto a wooden table and erupted in frustration. Despite sending more wealth than ever before, the organization had only responded by demanding even greater tribute. Humiliation burned inside him as he swore that once he earned a higher position within their ranks, he would repay every insult they had forced him to endure. His angry rant ended abruptly when he sensed another presence inside the room. Immediately, his expression changed. The rage disappeared from his face, replaced by a calm and polite demeanor. Looking upward, he discovered Jin Guan sitting comfortably on a high shelf, casually eating the purple pills that had been prepared earlier. The unexpected sight left the doctor speechless for a moment. Although he warned that medicine could easily become poison if consumed carelessly, Jin Guan showed no concern at all. His unusually strong body allowed him to treat the pills as though they were ordinary snacks. The doctor eventually remarked that he had no interest in the young man's health, provided he intended to pay for everything he had eaten. Jin Guan found the situation almost amusing. Rather than owing the doctor anything, he believed the opposite was true. From his perspective, the physician had unknowingly provided the perfect evidence against himself. The young warrior calmly held up one of the purple pills, exposing it as proof of the doctor's deception. To someone who preyed upon innocent patients, the most effective cure was not another medicine, but well-deserved punishment. The doctor's eyes immediately filled with murderous intent. Realizing his secret had been exposed, he abandoned every trace of kindness. Without wasting another second, he launched his hidden technique. With a swift movement, countless poisoned needles burst through the air at incredible speed, each one aimed directly at Jin Guan. The deadly projectiles flashed through the room, designed to continue flying until every needle pierced its target. However, the attack failed before it even reached its destination. Moving faster than the eye could follow, Jin Guan calmly intercepted every single needle with nothing more than his fingertips. Each poisonous projectile was caught effortlessly, leaving the doctor frozen in complete disbelief. His secret assassination technique, which had claimed countless victims, had been neutralized as though it were nothing more than a harmless game. Before the doctor could recover from the shock, Jin Guan counterattacked. A simple movement of his hand unleashed an overwhelming wave of force that completely overwhelmed the room. The violent shockwave shattered the doctor's balance and hurled him backward with tremendous power. He crashed heavily into the wooden interior of the clinic, unable to understand what kind of strength had struck him. As Jin Guan slowly approached, his expression remained calm. He questioned how someone entrusted with saving lives could instead use medical tools as instruments of murder. Although the poisoned needles had been cleverly designed, the power behind them was lacking. Jin Guan admitted that the technique itself was interesting, but its user had failed to understand the true principles of combat. Cold sweat covered the doctor's face. Unable to judge the young warrior's true strength, he desperately tried to determine who he was facing. Jin Guan carried no visible weapons, making him difficult to classify. After carefully observing his movements, the doctor concluded that his opponent had devoted himself entirely to martial arts, focused on hand-to-hand combat. When he sought confirmation, Jin Guan revealed nothing beyond his own name. Even that brief response was enough to make the doctor even more cautious. Judging from everything he had witnessed so far, he estimated that Jin Guan possessed strength equal to a high-ranking martial artist, possibly even far beyond rank B. Knowing ordinary techniques would never be enough, the doctor gathered an enormous amount of poisonous energy into one hand. A dense sphere of purple poison rapidly formed, filling the room with an unbearable stench. Moments later, he released the toxic power into the air, creating a thick, poisonous mist that spread throughout the clinic. The smell alone was enough to make breathing almost impossible. Even Jin Guan began coughing after inhaling the contaminated air. Watching his opponent struggle, the doctor became convinced that victory was finally within reach. As a poison specialist, he understood that a martial artist's greatest source of power came through controlled breathing. Once breathing became impossible, even the strongest fighter would eventually collapse. Certain that Jin Guan had already fallen into his trap, the doctor leaped high into the air while the poisonous fog continued covering the room. From above, he prepared his newest technique, channeling every ounce of deadly energy into a devastating finishing strike. With absolute confidence, he descended toward Jin Guan, believing the overwhelming poison would crush his opponent before any resistance could be offered. But Jin Guan never panicked. Instead of avoiding the attack, he calmly analyzed every movement. During the brief exchange of poisoned needles earlier, he had carefully studied the doctor's technique. Rather than relying only on overwhelming strength, he intended to return the very same method against its creator. Maintaining complete composure even within the poisonous mist, Jin Guan slowly raised his open hand. A confident smile appeared across his face as he prepared to demonstrate something that left even experienced martial artists speechless. In only a few moments, he had already mastered the doctor's own needle technique. Now he intended to use that newly learned skill against the man who had invented it, proving once again that no dishonest technique could remain an advantage in front of true talent. Jin Guan's hidden needles suddenly pierced through the doctor's hand, making the villain spit blood and scream in unbearable pain. The warrior casually flicked his fingers, showing more disgust toward the smell of the poisoned blood than any concern for the battle itself. At the same time, the doctor was blasted backward through a cloud of purple poison, suffering heavy injuries from his own toxic technique. Desperate to recover, the villain immediately activated a medical healing method to repair his wounded hand. Instead of being impressed, Jin Guan calmly revealed that the attack had not been magic at all. He demonstrated how he had developed an entirely new martial art by using only his fingertips. According to him, the technique worked by treating two fingers like a tightly clenched fist, allowing them to deliver incredible power despite their small size. After perfecting the concept, he gave it the simple name Finger Fist. The strange name only fueled the doctor's frustration. But before he could recover, Jin Guan drove two fingers into his shoulder with flawless precision. A burst of purple energy erupted from the impact as the strike penetrated deeply into his body. The villain collapsed to one knee in agony, unable to understand how such a simple-looking attack carried such terrifying force. Every attempt to comprehend the technique ended the same way, with another lightning-fast finger strike leaving him in even worse condition. Soon the doctor realized he was completely overwhelmed and began retreating in fear, trying to create as much distance as possible. Humiliated by the one-sided battle, he burned with rage while Jin Guan remained completely unfazed. Watching the strange attacks, the villain finally connected them to ancient pressure point techniques, once used by legendary martial artists. Believing he had figured out the secret, he prepared to protect his vital points before launching another attack. Unfortunately for him, Jin Guan was already several steps ahead. One precise strike landed on his chest, instantly paralyzing his upper body. More attacks followed without hesitation, shutting down his wrist, elbow, and other joints one after another. The final finger fist sliced through the air with explosive force, before crashing into the doctor's body. Every bone and joint screamed under the impact as he collapsed helplessly onto the floor. To his horror, he discovered that even his voice had been taken away, leaving him unable to scream despite the overwhelming pain. Barely able to move, the battered doctor could only glare at his opponent with endless frustration. In his mind, the victory came from nothing more than overwhelming physical strength. Jin Guan showed no interest in proving otherwise. His confidence came from years of relentless training, during which he had promised himself never to lose to evil people. Every day of isolation had been dedicated to becoming superior in every aspect of life, from martial arts to discipline, and even personal appearance. That unwavering determination had shaped both his strength and his unique fighting style. Even after suffering complete humiliation, the doctor refused to accept defeat. Pulling out a vial filled with a mysterious purple elixir, he shattered the mana stones he had collected and released an enormous wave of dark energy. Poisonous smoke flooded the surroundings as his special blood ability awakened. dramatically increasing his power beyond rank B and pushing it toward rank A. Overflowing with confidence, the villain condensed an immense amount of destructive energy into his hand. Dark lightning surged around his body as he charged forward with everything he had. Despite the overwhelming display of power, Jin Guan remained perfectly calm. He simply took a slow breath, centered himself, and assumed a relaxed fighting stance. In the next instant, an intense white flash swallowed the entire clinic in a violent explosion. The doctor was struck by a devastating shock wave that instantly froze his body in place. When the light faded, he looked down in complete disbelief. Every bit of the enormous energy he had gathered had disappeared without leaving a trace. His supposedly unstoppable rank A attack had been erased before he had even seen his opponent move. Only then did he notice Jin Guan standing calmly in front of him, with his fist resting just short of his stomach. The young warrior had deliberately stopped the attack at the last possible moment, proving that he had shown mercy by sparing the villain's life instead of finishing him. After stopping his punch at the very last moment, Jin Guan slowly lowered his fist and admitted that, for a brief second, the doctor's sudden surge of power had actually caught his attention. The villain immediately checked his own chest in disbelief, unable to understand how he had survived such a devastating attack without being blown apart. Meanwhile, Jin Guan simply clenched his fist once again and challenged him with a calm yet intimidating expression, making it clear that the battle could continue if the doctor still believed in his newfound strength. The moment the young warrior tightened his fist, an overwhelming aura spread throughout the area, causing the surroundings to tremble under the pressure alone. The doctor instantly realized the terrifying gap between their abilities. Every trace of confidence disappeared, replaced by fear and cold sweat. Accepting complete defeat, he dropped to his knees, respectfully introduced himself as Bikman Mundu, and surrendered without any further resistance. The following morning, warm sunlight filtered through the trees surrounding the traditional temple. Inside, Yong So-hai slowly regained consciousness as dark purple poison escaped from her mouth. Under Jin Guan's watchful eyes, Bikman Mundu carefully inserted acupuncture needles to remove every remaining trace of poison from her body. While treating her, the apothecary revealed the truth behind the mysterious plague that had struck the village. According to him, it had never been a real disease, but merely a weak poison that he had personally spread throughout the settlement. As the toxins left her body, Yong So-hai's condition steadily improved. Soon afterward, Bikman Mundu prepared a special medicinal pill, explaining that it would complete her recovery once she consumed it. During the conversation, Sip Japsu noticed that the man was actually an apothecary, a title that left Jin Guan confused. The elder then explained that although most hunters awakened ordinary classes, a small number received extremely rare professions such as apothecary. Those individuals specialized in advanced medicine and poison techniques, making them exceptionally valuable and incredibly difficult to find. Proud of his rare abilities, Bikman Mundu began praising his own talent, but Alice quickly lost her patience. She struck him on the head, refusing to let him glorify himself after poisoning an entire village. Furious over the humiliation, the apothecary could only grumble in frustration. Before the situation escalated, Jin Guan silently appeared behind him and prepared another pressure point strike. The mere sight of that familiar stance terrified Bikman Mundu, forcing him to bow his head and apologize immediately before another finger fist could land. Once the tension settled, Jin Guan questioned why someone blessed with such extraordinary medical talent had chosen the path of crime. The apothecary remained silent for a moment, before quietly extending his hand and revealing the shattered fragments of the mana stone he had used during their battle. He explained that after the portal disaster, mana stones had become the world's primary source of energy. They fueled cities, powered technological progress, and transformed society itself. For hunters, however, these crystals represented something far more valuable, because they allowed tremendous growth in strength beyond normal limits. Such precious stones could only be found in places overflowing with magical energy, or inside powerful monsters. Bikman Mundu then confessed that he had been collecting those rare crystals as tribute demanded by a far more dangerous organization. Hearing this revelation left Alice completely stunned, as she realized every payment the villagers had made had ultimately been handed over as tribute instead of helping anyone. The apothecary silently confirmed the truth, making her anger explode once again. Unable to contain herself, Alice grabbed him by the collar and demanded every stolen coin back. Her fury only intensified when she noticed the necklace around his neck, recognizing it as the treasured keepsake that had once belonged to her father. The room fell silent as everyone watched the emotional confrontation unfold. Holding the necklace tightly, Bikman Mundu revealed that it was also the only remaining memory of his own father. Alice refused to accept the explanation and continued venting her anger while the others struggled to restrain her. After everyone finally calmed down, the apothecary admitted that recovering the tribute already delivered would be nearly impossible. Jin Guan immediately shifted the conversation toward the people responsible for collecting those payments. The question alone made Bikman Mundu visibly nervous. Feeling the overwhelming pressure from the young warrior, he realized hiding the truth was no longer an option. Choosing cooperation over resistance, he offered to personally guide the group to the place where the criminals regularly gathered. At the same time, he warned them that those bandits were protected by the powerful Red Blood Alliance, making the mission extremely dangerous. Jin Guan admitted he had never heard of such an organization, leaving the apothecary genuinely surprised. Amused by the young warrior's complete lack of knowledge, he remarked that Jin Guan seemed to have spent more than a decade isolated from the outside world. He then explained that the current era was ruled by the legendary Four Celestial Kings, while the true force operating behind the scenes was the feared Blood God Guild, the organization that controlled the entire region from the shadows.